Good evening all, and welcome. Being stranded is an uncomfortable situation. Having very limited options and not being able to go to your destination can be a terrifying prospect, especially in the middle of nowhere or in the company of people with dark motives. I hope you're ready because it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This happened years ago when I was 19. I'm now in my mid-20s, and I still remember this very clearly because of how creeped out I was. Back then, I was living over 600 miles away from my parents, in a different state. Even though there was a distance, my mum and I still spoke on the phone at least twice a week, and we were still very close. So when we found out her cancer was back, I didn't think twice about dropping everything to drive down to see her. A plane ticket would be too expensive. I had a 10-year-old Toyota that might have been a bit beat up, but still got me from A to B quite cheaply and quietly. My parents weren't thrilled of the idea of me driving the 11 hours by myself, but my mind was made up. So they offered me a deal. I would stop at a rest stop every 2 to 3 hours and stretch my legs and call them. In exchange for this courtesy, they would pay for my gas. If I didn't call within the 3-hour window, they would assume I'd been in an accident and call me repeatedly, interrupting the audiobook/podcast they knew I would have on. I accepted the deal, and that's why I was at this particular rest stop at 2:45 a.m. This was actually one of the nicest stops, well lit, multiple vending machines that didn't have huge cages around them, and the payphone wasn't broken, and it looked clean. There were a couple of cars with people sleeping in them. I still had 15 minutes before I had to check in with my parents, so I got out the car and stretched, and then almost jumped out my skin when I heard a man's voice right behind me. "Miss, can I ask you a favor?" I turned around. He's leaning against my car. I have no idea how he got there so fast. I didn't see him when I parked, but there he was, uncomfortably close to me. He looked to be in his 40s. He didn't look dirty or twitchy. He was too close, but his body language didn't scream threatening. And even though I was 19 years old, barely over 5 feet, and at that point in my life 110 pounds soaking wet, and even though I had already binged a lot of true crime media and knew the dangers of a girl my age alone at night, with an out-of-state license plate, my dumb ass asked what he needed. He told me he accidentally locked his keys and phone in his truck, and could he just borrow my phone real quick to call his friend? It would just take a second, and it would really help him out. And I almost handed him my phone. I was reaching into my pocket to give it to him, with a "no problem," when I looked at his face. Like I said, the rest stop was surprisingly well lit, and the guy appeared to be normal in every respect, except for his eyes. He had dead shark eyes. You know what I'm talking about. It's the Ted Bundy, Dick Cheney actress in a Glade commercial who is trying to convince us that she's in love with a dumbass who doesn't know how air freshener works eyes. They're smiling, but the eyes are vacant and creepy and staring way too hard. I got that feeling that says run away. I knew immediately not to hand this guy my phone. So I put on my best customer service smile and told him, "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, but I don't have a charger, and I need to save my battery for the tracking app that my parents have on my phone, and I need that juice to call my parents, which is actually right now. Good luck." I turned and walked about 20 feet away. He didn't leave. He was just leaning against my car watching me, and now I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to leave him alone with my car because he creeped me out. He had that serial killer face. So going to the bathroom is out, but I also wanted to get away from him, prove that I'm not gonna help, and maybe he'll leave. I could technically get to my car, but I would have to get very close to him unless I crawled over my passenger side door. He wasn't moving. So I did the first thing that popped into my mind. I called my dad, and my dad, for the first time that night, didn't pick up the phone. When I heard his voicemail, I glanced back. The guy still hadn't moved. He was still staring at me, so I faked a conversation with my dad. I angled my body so that the guy couldn't see that I'd hung up the phone and loudly said that I should be home in about half hour, when in reality, it was at least another 4-hour drive. I mentioned exactly where I was and reassured the fake caller that this was a good rest stop with plenty of lighting and a couple of visible security cameras. The guy still hadn't moved, and I'm running out of steam on this fake conversation. In the years since, I've thought of a lot of things I could have said while pretending to talk to my dad, but in that moment I was beginning to seriously freak out and my mind went blank. So I hung up and didn't know what to do. I had hoped the fake phone call would scare him off, but he was persistent, still leaning against my car. I stalled for more minutes. I bought cookies from the vending machine. I walked around a little, and at this point, he'd been leaning against my car staring at me for 10 minutes. I honestly debated walking up to one of the men sleeping in their cars and asking for help. And just the thought of having to wake someone up to help me get into my own goddamn car annoyed me enough that I stopped stalling and headed back to my vehicle. I decided that unless he touched me, I was just going to pretend he wasn't there. He waited until I was unlocking my car door before he started talking to me again. He told me that he really needs to use my phone. He's stranded here unless he can call a friend to bring the spare keys. He's not angry or begging. His voice sounds weirdly friendly, but he's been creepily watching me for way too long while blocking my exit, so I'm not falling for it. I almost pointed out the working payphone, just in case I'm wrong about this, and was being a bitch to a guy who needed help. But then he leaned forward, and as I was getting in, I lost all nerve and slammed and locked the door as fast as possible. He didn't move until I started the car and put it in reverse, and then he finally stepped back and let me pull out. I didn't even have my seatbelt on, and I was so focused on staying away from him. And then halfway out the rest stop, my mum called me. My mum, who would freak out if I didn't pick up and who was already sick, and I needed to put on my seatbelt. I could still see him in my mirror. He was standing right next to where I was parked with his back to me. He was far enough away that I felt okay parking to answer the phone, but I kept my engine running and a watch on him. I didn't want to worry my mum, so I told her everything was fine, where I was, my ETA. And now that I was in my locked car away from him, I was beginning to feel like I had overreacted. She scolds me about speeding, and I tune her out because the guy is moving now. As my mum lectures me about road safety, I watch the guy cross into a truck, unlock the door, and get in. The keys being locked in no longer seemed to be an issue for him. I watched the truck head back out to the freeway and drive out of sight. I had to pretend to be fine and not upset to my mum. I didn't get back on the road for another 20 minutes, and when I did, I didn't speed. I didn't want to see that truck again. I found out years later that the closest city to the rest stop had major problems with sex trafficking, and the girls who look like they don't live nearby, or look like maybe they're living out of their cars, tend to be targets. I don't know if that was what was happening, or if he was just trying to scare me to hand over my phone. Either way, creep at the rest stop. Let's not meet again. I'm a female, and when this story took place I was 19 years old. I will also mention that this was in 2002, so I didn't have a cell phone. I was driving from a friend's cabin in Northern California, down a very dangerous, curvy canyon road in the mountains. It is a beautiful area during the day, and you can see for miles. But nighttime brings out a certain evil like nowhere else. Not the type of place you want to find yourself stranded. It was around midnight when my car started acting strangely, and then all of a sudden, just died. I coasted for about 100 feet as I was going slightly downhill and was able to get off on the tiny shoulder, so I wasn't in the middle of the road. I kept trying to get my car to start, but every time I turned the key, it would make a loud screeching sound. It sounded like metal on metal. Not good. I figured I was just making it worse, so I stopped. Great. It was completely dark, very late, and I was alone in the middle of nowhere. Literally, I had not seen a single car since I left, and as I peered out the window, I had a very uneasy feeling overcome me, and I decided at that point I was not leaving the car until daylight. I locked my doors. There's no telling what is out there at night. Bears, mountain lions, Bigfoot. These are just a few of the many things that live in those mountains. When it got daylight, I would set out on foot to find a phone. It was going to be a long night. With that said, I gathered up some of my stuff and rolled a joint. I was about halfway through my smoking session and I almost fell asleep when a sudden jolt of lights appeared. I saw it out of the corner of my eye. I could see way across the canyon, headlights coming down the winding road towards me. They could not see me as my lights were off. I knew I had about 5 minutes until they came around the last curve and I would be completely visible, sitting here in my car that wouldn't go. I didn't like the way this was panning out, and even though I had told myself earlier that I was not leaving the car, at that moment, I decided I was getting out. I was going to hide somewhere until the car passed. I grabbed my keys, flashlight and wallet, locked my door and took off running into the night, using only the moonlight to see. I was really stoned and was silently second-guessing my decision to abandon my car as I ran across the road about 75 feet away and hid behind a tree that was behind a guardrail. Behind me, somewhere probably pretty close, was a straight drop-off in the canyon off the side of the mountain, so I had limited options as to where to hide, and it was basically pitch black out. The truck was approaching mine, and I squatted there as I watched it slow to a stop. My knees were already getting hurt. Great. I knew most people would be happy to see a passerby if they were in my position, but I had a bad feeling that night and would have much rather just waited until daylight to take care of myself. Call me stubborn and paranoid, but I think it saved my life that night. I was hoping that when the person saw my car and it was empty, they would just leave. That didn't happen. The door of the truck opened and I could see a tall man walking over to my car when he got close to it. He started moving his head all around like he was looking for something. He was probably looking for me. A dog jumped out of the back of the truck and immediately starts sniffing the car and heads directly towards me. My heart sank through my toes. I was physically shaking and really wished that I had not smoked so much of that joint earlier. As the dog nears me, the man tried to open the driver's side door, and when it didn't open, he started banging the window like he was trying to break it. I started to cry. I didn't know what I was going to do. The dog ran right up to me, but surprisingly didn't bark nor bite. He smelt me and was on his way. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. When he finally stopped beating my window, the man began pacing all around the road, yelling at me to come out, yelling things like, "Where'd you go? Come out, get over here." He yelled for a full minute, and then he just walked over to my car, punched the hood, and got back into the vehicle. I heard him whistle, and the dog jumped back into the back of the truck, Then he slowly drove away, honking his horn and flashing his lights. I was so scared that he was hiding just out of view, waiting for me to come out, that I hid there in the exact same spot until the sun came up. I literally didn't move a muscle, and my legs almost gave out on me after I decided to go back to my car. For just a minute, I could see if I could get it to start. I almost fell down as I ran back across the road. I've never been so scared in my life, and I got in the car, and to my absolute amazement, it started up on the first try. My foot must have already been on the gas pedal because I screeched my tires loudly as I got the hell out of there. I couldn't believe what just happened. When I got home, my boyfriend made me call the police and make a report. They came out and took my statement, but nothing ever came of it. I often wonder what would have happened to me if I'd have stayed in my car and not hidden. Please use this as a warning. If you find yourself alone driving in the middle of nowhere, you never know what someone's intentions are. So to the creepy guy that tried to break my windows and find me that night, I hope we never meet again. A few nights ago, my boyfriend and I took a brief road trip to a neighboring state to see Sam Smith. Before we left, I was working 10 days straight at my job and getting about 4 to 5 hours of sleep. I was super exhausted and very easily upset over small things. The drive there was fine, albeit exhausting, but we made it to our hotel with plenty of time to spare. We opted to shower and get some food before leaving the hotel for the concert, and I thought we should use Uber since it was in the downtown area, a place I'd never been, and I knew the traffic was going to be ridiculous. And considering I'm running on fumes at this point, I thought Ubering wouldn't be a terrible idea. Our Uber driver arrives, and the ride there is pleasant. We get to the concert venue and easily find our seats, and the show begins. I want to take a lot of videos on my phone, but only managed a few as my phone was on 10% battery, and I knew I would need it for the Uber later, so I switched it off. I'd just like to state that Sam Smith is amazing live, and if you get a chance to see him, do it. The concert ends, and after battling through the crowd to get out, I switch on my phone, which is now at 7%, to get the Uber. It's 11 PM, and as this was my first time, I wasn't expecting prices to jump ridiculously high. So my boyfriend suggested that we take a walk around the block or so, and check out downtown while we wait. I agree. We walk, and about half hour later, we stop by the entrance to a small courtyard or park, about half a block away from a gas station. My boyfriend tells me to book the Uber, but my phone perishes before I can. Being the paranoid and easily stressed, anxious woman that I am, I start to have a panic attack. I can't breathe enough or slow down my breathing. I'm sweaty, my heart is pounding, and I begin to overthink that we are now stranded downtown with no way home. I thought about getting a cab or bus, but I had no cash on me, and it was getting late. My boyfriend, bless his soul, is much more logical and rational when dealing with stressful situations, and suggests he go to the gas station and sees if he can get a charger for my phone and plug it in there. I can barely talk or walk at this point, as my body is not functioning. So he helps me sit down on the bench and tells me he'll be right back and not to go anywhere. Nothing sketchy happens while he's gone, and when he returns, he helps me to the gas station and lets me know he told the police officer in there what happened. The officer was really understanding, and he basically bought a charger for us and stood by my phone while it booted up. After taking some deep breaths, I get my phone and try to get Uber. This is where I'm told I now have no money in my debit card, and I start to panic more. Here we are alone, in a more shady part of downtown, with bars on the windows of the gas station at night, with no money and no way to get home. My rational boyfriend reminds me I have a credit card, and after checking the balance, it looks like I have just enough to get Uber and gas for my own car when we leave. But I now have only one card to get me through the rest of the week before payday. I book another Uber, and it says he's about 5 minutes or so away, so I start calming down. I tell my boyfriend that I'm going to step out to get some air, and he tells me he'll be right out. He's going to get me some water, as there was a fairly long line in the gas station, and with all the people staring at me, I didn't want to be in there any longer than I needed to. So I went out and stood by the ice machine. This is where things started to go bad. A few moments later, a white car with its windows rolled down parks in the parking lot of the gas station. There are two rough-looking guys in the car, one white with what I think is brown hair and stubble, and the other black with dark blue or maybe grey or a black shirt, wearing a hat. I feel them staring at me while I try to get my breathing under control. At this point my hands have gone numb, and I'm finding it difficult to keep my balance. I just wanted to get home. Then two other guys came around the corner and walk over to the car. They were both black, one with dreads wearing a wife beater and jeans, the other with a shaved head, and I think a white or maybe light grey shirt. They talk for a little and exchange glances in my direction, and I hear them laughing about how messed up and strung out I was. I guess they thought I must have been high, and either having a really bad trip or coming down. And I didn't blame them. I felt really terrible, and I'm sure I looked the part. I just tried to ignore them when my hands weren't shaking so badly that I could check my phone to see where the Uber was. It said he was only 3 minutes away. I glanced through the barred window and see my boyfriend only a few people away from the front of the line, and I feel like everything would be fine. But I was wrong. The two guys who were outside of the car started catcalling me and trying to get my attention. I continued ignoring them. Then they started coming towards me. I knew I should have moved or said something or done something, but I was frozen. My throat was closing up, and I felt panic setting back in. They started saying I was sexy and asking what I was doing alone, asking where I was going, what I was on, and one of them started touching my arm and getting really close. I barely mumbled out that I wanted them to leave me alone. They just laughed it off and said they would take me where I needed to go. I felt them starting to pull me towards the car where the guys were waiting. I attempted to fight them off, but I was so weak I could barely walk or stand on my own. I felt like I was going to puke. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. I kept mumbling that I wanted them to let me go and leave me alone, but they didn't listen or care, and just kept saying that we were all going to have fun. One of them made a point of grabbing my ass and squeezing it. And we were right at the car, and the smell of pot and cigarettes and alcohol was filling my lungs as one of the back doors opened, and I couldn't do anything. I feel like I deserved this because I couldn't fight back. I tried one last time to break free, but their hands were like claws digging into my skin. Just as I was about to be shoved into the car, I heard a familiar voice shout, "What the hell?" Before I knew what was happening, the guys threw me on the ground and climbed into the car, peeling out of the parking lot and the street before the doors had even shut. I couldn't even process it as my boyfriend ran over to me and helped me off the ground. I just started crying. The police officer was outside too, talking into his radio about what happened, and asked me if I was okay. I said I was, but I didn't know if I meant it or not. If they had just been a second too late, I would have been in that car with them, going to who knows where, and had who knows what done to me. The Uber arrived not long after that, and after speaking briefly with the officer, we got in the car and went to the hotel. We got there safely, and once we were back in the hotel, I stopped shaking. I couldn't sleep though, and even though I'm back home hundreds of miles from the creeps, I can't help but be paranoid that they'll find me somehow, or that I'll run into them again. I don't like thinking about what could have happened to me, but I can't make my mind shut off or make it go away. I guess what I've learned from this, and what I can let everyone else know, is to make sure your phone is fully charged, maybe bring a battery pack, and that you have enough money, and that you don't go anywhere alone. You could be taken in an instant. To give a bit of context, this story involves me and my two best friends, Andrew and Marion. We are 3 classmates, all 18-year-old males. At the start of the week, Andrew kept bothering me and Marion about going to a certain party outside the city, in the town where he lives. Andrew said some guy was throwing a party and had bought a lot of food, alcohol, and weed for us, and there would be no need for us to bring anything. Sounded great. Both me and Marion asked who the dude was, and Andrew said it was someone who he knew, and the situation seemed fine. Next issue would be transportation to said town, but Andrew also assured us that the guy would come and collect us in his car and then drive us back the next day. Friday rolls around, and both me and Marion had partied hard the night before, having slept something like 3 hours. The dude who came to pick us up was apparently a religion teacher in the town Andrew grew up in, and about whom he had told us a lot of shady stuff. The dude seemed to be in his mid-30s, but was apparently older. What we knew of him was that he basically did crazy stuff with a lot of young people, like parties and alcohol, but it just seemed like this guy was trying to relive his youth. So we went along with it. After all 3 of us were in the car, he said that if we got to guess his age, he'd buy us another lot of weed. After a few guesses, me and Marion failed to find out his age. Andrew, even though he knew, didn't want to tell us. It seemed like a fun game. Then the dude drove us to some place to apparently buy more weed. We ended up on the road. The trip was supposed to be a few hours drive away from the city, but this guy was insane. He sped all the way there, overtook people from the right, drove on the left lane just so that he could scream while seeing the other cars coming straight ahead. It was a hell of a ride, and both me and Marion were absolutely crapping ourselves, wondering if we were even going to make it to the party. Andrew was somehow not fazed by any of this, since he knew the guy, and apparently this was what he did. What we kept wondering was, where does the dude get money from to buy a couple of young boys alcohol and weed and food? The story seemed like a modern version of Candy in a White Van, so I, from the moment I realized it, kept an eye on the shady teacher. Marion, even though he shared his concerns at first, started thinking we got the wrong picture, and the dude was just really trying to have fun and relive his youth. During our bumpy and hellish ride, I questioned his driving skills at one point. He then proudly pulled out his wallet while driving and gave me his license to prove that he was certified to drive almost every type of vehicle. At that point, I caught a glimpse of his birthday written on the license, 1975, which meant, at the time this happened, he was 42 years old. Okay, not really weird, but why would he try to hide his age? We had finally gotten to his house, and he then gave us some pizzas he had brought earlier. I was a bit cautious since he may have put something in the food, but since he ate from the same pizza we did, I laid low. When I mentioned that I now knew he was 42, he was visibly disturbed and kept trying to argue that he does look a lot younger. None of us said he looked older, just that we knew his age. Then he showed us all the alcohol that he had bought for us. His fridge contained the following. There were around 2 or 3 dozen beers, 4 bottles of wine, a 1.5-litre bottle of Jack Daniels, and a bunch of other whiskies and bottles of spirits laying around his kitchen. This was weird, since we were there for mostly the weed and weren't planning on drinking a lot, but he was very keen on us drinking something before we smoked. The plan was that after we arrive and grab a bite to eat, he would go pick up one of our classmates and her brother, who was a bit older than us, from a nearby village. They were there visiting their grandparents, and we thought it'd be nice for them to join the party. He kept telling us to drink, and then wanted to stay for a while longer, before going to pick them up. Then he wanted to not fetch them, and kept asking, "We'll have fun on our own, why do we need a girl round here?" It was a bit weird, but after a bit of convincing he left. During this time, I was on high alert, but nothing super weird happened. Sure, the whole experience seemed a bit out of place, but heck, we're young. All 3 of us decided that this was either going to be a shit show and something bad will happen, or on the other hand, it could be the night of our lives. Before he left, he said he wanted to give us a tour of the house. It was an old, traditionally decorated house. This is in Romania, by the way, for context. And as we went through all the rooms, I wanted to check for creepy things or out-of-place doors. In the last room, there was this small door on the wall which I asked him about. He kindly showed me it was a small storage room with barrels of a local alcoholic drink that had about 80% alcohol. When we came back, after about half an hour, we had already drank a few beers and were in quite a good mood. He kept trying us to down glasses of Coke and whiskey, and he proposed that if Marion downed his glass, he would down one himself. After a while, I noticed that he kept saying to himself that he shouldn't have a drink or drink that much alcohol, but in an unusually angry tone. He seemed to be highly displeased at the fact that he was tipsy, and the party kept going, and then he brought the weed. There was so much of it. The 3 of us usually smoked joints, but we decided it was time for our first blunts, so we rolled up 2 fat blunts. We smoked them, and I went straight to the skies. During this time, I only noticed him puffing once or twice. That was a bit weird, but I brushed it off. I was having quite the enjoyable trip. He pulled his phone up and started recording us. That was weird. He wanted to record us while being high off our tits for his Snapchat account. And I thought it was strange that someone his age had Snapchat. The only question I had was why he would post on his story, since people his age or work-related contacts may see him getting high with a bunch of high schoolers, which doesn't look good. Or who would he want to send that video to? Anyway, what really started being weird was that he kept trying to force Andrew and Marion to hit the last blunt. He kept taking it and pushing it towards them. It didn't seem like a friendly gesture, but rather a command, or him forcing it on them. Andrew got up after a short while and sat in the kitchen with his head on the table. He was out. He never tried to approach me though, and I think it was because he felt I was being cautious of him and had my eye on him. For a while after the blunts, I stopped caring. But as the trip wore off, I started to notice really weird behaviors. The guy apparently also owned a gym, but he kept proposing to Andrew and Marion that they go to hit the gym at 3 in the morning, since he owns it and he's going to open it just for them. Both my friends are pretty buff and hit the gym often, so it seemed like a cool idea at first to them. I knew his gym was quite a drive from here, and I could also remember Andrew telling me that the gym was in an abandoned building, as he'd been there before. Since Andrew himself was out cold on the kitchen table, the creepy guy kept proposing that only him and Marion go. Now, That was the first time I stepped up my protective attitude and made a plan. I wasn't going to let the two of them go alone. We moved Andrew to the bed and then just sat around chatting with music in the background. One particular thing we noticed in this is that on several occasions he kept asking Marion if he had any cell signal, which he did. This is when things got super creepy. Not only did he start mildly touching Marion's shoulder, while saying he looked a lot better than Andrew. At first we thought it was just gym talk, like dudes always get from other dudes that hit the gym. The sort of, nice pegs bro. But it was creepier than that. Then he started looking at our classmate and kept saying that he'd love to cut her beautiful hair off with a pair of scissors, and then we'd force laughs and try and change topics. He'd bring this stuff up again, and at that moment everyone in the room knew that something was really not cool. When we asked him casually about how he had so much money, he said that he usually had to fly down to London every week, but he'd only stay there for a short while, and maybe he owns prostitutes there, or little boys. He laughed. He kept telling jokes all night about how he had money, like how he was a janitor at the Houses of Parliament or some other stuff, but it seemed a bit too real, especially since his eyes had this weird glint in them when he mentioned the boys. Our classmate's big brother, who didn't drink anywhere near as much as we did, suggested that the guy drive them back home. He took a lot of convincing and now kept trying to make them stay. While all of this was going on, he kept playing jokes on Marion about how I'm gonna sleep with Andrew in bed and how they were gonna get together under the same blanket. Just a lot of creepy stuff, insinuations. Once Marion was sitting down, he grabbed his wrist and kept saying, "Yes, Marion, nice biceps." One thing Andrew told us was that he was gay, as a slight joke. The dude then played on the card of, "Oh, do you actually believe him? Andrew's just spewing crap." While we were driving there, Andrew said, "I thought you were either gay or really generous with people, and I think the conclusion that you are just really generous." Marion actually believed this as well, and we just thought this guy was odd. The guy was offering us his house, food, alcohol, and weed, and we didn't want to think that he was into younger guys, since we tried to see him in a good light. But after the hours that went, and all the creepy things that he did and said, our minds were starting to change. It was later in the night that Marion asked, since he was so drunk on high, "Dude, are you gay or something?" Then the guy went into a weird rage. "No, stop believing the lies Andrew told you, of course not." He went into this weird state like he was half talking to himself, angrily shouting, and he also at some point grabbed Marion by the neck, joking about how he is displeased by him not wanting to come to the gym at 3 a.m. Marion is freaking the hell out. He understood now, like I had suspected all night, that this guy was not in his right mind, definitely gay, and maybe into smaller kids. And shortly after grabbing Marion and trying to convince him to go, he left to deliver our classmate and his brother. The moment he left, Marion started freaking out. He wanted to wake up Andrew so that the three of us could go to sleep in the same bed, and the dude would sleep alone, as there were 2 double beds. He tried to slap and pour water on his face, but Andrew wasn't going to wake up. I went into the kitchen, brought a knife, and gave it to Marion, and told him to keep it under his end of the bed, as he slept against the wall, and I had an empty beer bottle near my end for a quick grab. We considered calling the cops, but the creepy teacher didn't exactly do anything the police could arrest him for. It was the middle of the night, and we were on the outskirts of a town at a really long drive away from our city, with no chance of us catching a way out of there. None of us had a driving license or friends to call and pick us up at that hour, so I proposed we play it cool with the guy once he came back. If he tries anything, there were at least 2 of us, and 3 if we could wake Andrew, and there was no actual weapon in the house, not even a bat or something. Our plan was that if at any time during the night we hear the guy try anything on Andrew, we'd knock him the hell out, then tie him up with my belt, and then call the police. He came back after a short talk and we went to bed. He left the light on in the kitchen, so our room had some light. His room was right next to ours, and there was no hall or door between them, just a doorway. The bathroom was also in his room, but right next to this doorway. Both me and Mariam were freaking out. This was roughly 4 a.m, and we had to stay awake the whole night. My best friend was high as a kite and scared. My adrenaline was pumping so hard I barely felt it, but was definitely in my system. The guy genuinely wanted to sleep, but we tried to stay awake all night. My phone was on the table next to the bed, dead but charging, so we kept writing a note file on his phone and passing it from one to another to communicate. We knew that if we even tried the slightest whisper, he'd wake or hear us. Mariam would write something, he'd pass the phone to me, then he'd fall asleep for 30 seconds as I wrote, and then he'd wake up to write a response. We did this for a while. Then we heard the guy get up and go to the bathroom. The very second we heard movement, Mariam was clutching the knife, and I had the bottle in my hand. This happened about 4 times. It's a weird amount of times to go to the bathroom since we drank a lot, so he should be dehydrated as hell, but he's 42, and he kept drinking water every time he woke. We could hear him gulping. At 6:30 a.m, however, we somehow fell asleep. It was the most disturbing and scary sleep I ever had. Then I felt Marian jabbing me in the ribs. I felt like I was home, and I had just dreamed everything that had passed that night. I then jumped. I had both my hands on my bottle, and there was a dark figure standing at the end of the bed. Both me and Marian froze, then realized to relief that it was Andrew. He told us when he brought us to this house that he had to leave somewhere in town around 9 a.m. next morning, so he'd probably wake up early to leave, and then to wake us when he returned. That's why me and Marian crapped our pants thinking it was the guy, when it was actually like 7:45 in the morning. We'd fallen asleep for roughly an hour. Me and Marian had no clue how to tell Andrew what happened. The guy was still in the house. He woke up and acted supernatural like nothing had happened. And to be fair, nothing major happened, but his behavior definitely scared the crap out of us. Who wants to grab boys, and then he tells a girl he met a couple of hours ago that he'd love to drive his scissors through her beautiful hair? That sounds like the psycho in a cheap horror movie. After the guy left around 8:30, we told Andrew everything. He was laughing at first, but then realized how creepy this was. It was really something we had no idea what to do about. We were once again stranded, our only way home being this guy or calling our parents. We thought we'd look through his house, and if we find anything really alarming, we'd call the police. Not a lot later in the search, I found a particular envelope in a cupboard filled with books. It was some sort of official document, and it had the name of a UK official border customs. It was torn open, and I pulled out a bunch of papers. After reading for a while, I found out that apparently he was caught smuggling 12,000 cigarettes out the UK. Okay, that was weird, but the next thing blew my mind. I kept noticing a small closet in the corner of the room where we were chilling, and I kept wondering all night why it was there. While he was gone off running his errands in town, I went ahead and opened it. And when I opened the closet door, I found a plastic envelope filled with random cutouts of this young guy and several other young men. Now this guy seemed to have the patience to sit with a pair of scissors and cut this guy out, put it in that envelope and tape them to the closet door. That's kind of messed up. When I showed the guys the pictures and the letters from the UK, we knew something was up. There was still nothing we could have done, and as a result, we waited for him to come home and tried to rush him into driving us home. And after a few setbacks, we finally made it. A really unsettling fact was that during our drive back, Andrew asked him for his phone, and we browsed his gallery while laughing. He had an unsettling amount of videos with Marion. I don't know what to make of all of this. The guy's most definitely insane and does some shady stuff for money, but I honestly doubt there's anything serious to take to the police. So, creepy guy, let's not meet again. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I do hope that you enjoyed tonight's edition of Stranded Stories. I really wanted to make this video longer, but I think I have enough material for 2 of these. So I'm going to make a second edition. The next one, I'm hoping, will have more stories of being lost in the middle of nowhere. I know that some of you might say, oh, being at a guy's house all alone isn't stranded. Well, I thought it was, because you can't leave the situation. You literally are stranded. There's nothing you can do about it. You're at their mercy. That's how I saw it. I hope that you agreed with my definition. So yeah, I hope you did. I really would like to do this topic again. Again, it's one that I do enjoy, as it invokes a different level of horror, in my opinion anyway. If there's a stranded story that has happened to any of you, I would seriously appreciate it if you could send it in to my email. That'd be really handy. Or my Reddit, either are fine. Because yeah, the stories are good. I really like reading these. So let me know, guys, if there's any other kind of story you can send that into. As always, a huge thanks to my wonderful and amazing patrons whose names you can see on screen. It really does mean a lot to get your continued help and support. And if you'd like to help, you can donate as little as $1 every month to get your name on the end credits and a handful of other rewards for signing up. All the information can be found on the Patreon website. Link in the description. With that being said, guys, it's time for me to sign off. Thanks for watching. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. And a special thanks to Moist Wood.